morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. Terastallization, or more commonly abbreviated to Tera Types, is the fourth consecutive battle gimmick introduced by Game Freak, following Mega Evolution, Z-Moves, and Dynamax. Since last year I made a video pitting all three against each other, giving you my thoughts on their strengths and weaknesses, it only seems fitting to do the same for this one. So to be as crystal clear as possible, haha, get it? Because Tera crystals? Anyway, I'll be judging this gimmick based on an outline of 5 points that I look for in a good gimmick. Number 1, accessibility, or how many Pokemon can use it and how well it's integrated into the gameplay. Number 2, balance, both in the main story and competitively speaking. Number 3, story and lore, pretty self-explanatory. Number 4, hype factor, because being excited is always nice. And number 5, any extra features that it can offer, such as raid battles. So with my handy-dandy little checklist, let's jump straight into our first point, accessibility. This is one that Game Freak has steadily gotten better with over time. One of my main complaints with Mega Evolution in last year's video was how inaccessible it was in the Gen 6 games, both to the player and the Pokedex as a whole. X and Y gives you access to like less than 10 megas during the main story, and as a whole, only about 50 Pokemon had access to Mega Evolutions, which was roughly about 7% of the total Pokedex at the time. Z-Moves and Dynamax expanded on this by giving a handful of Pokemon unique moves or forms, but every Pokemon is still able to use those mechanics. And Terastallization follows suit, with every Pokemon possessing its own Tera type. Terastallization is also introduced earlier in the story than all the other mechanics. It wastes absolutely no time getting you into it, and I really appreciated that. It really feels integral to the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet experience instead of just being something that was lazily tacked on. And that's reflected by probably a record number of trainers utilizing this mechanic in-game. Just about every single significant NPC will use Terastallization eventually, which is a point that I particularly praise Z-Moves for in the other video. Mega Evolutions were incredibly underutilized by main story foes in Gen 6, and in the Galar region, Dynamax was mostly exclusive to gyms. So for some stretches of the game, you could just completely forget it existed. As someone who's not really a huge fan of gimmicks, I took that as a positive, but I recognize that for most people that's probably a negative. The only true complaint I have about Terastallization from an accessibility standpoint is how hard it is to change your Pokemon's Tera type. In a game like this, where nearly everything has been made so convenient and easy, getting 50 Tera Shards to change type sticks out like a sore thumb as this overly grindy activity. Like, I'm sorry, I just don't have enough hours in the day for this. Changing your Tera type should not be harder than changing your car insurance. Some of the recent raid events have helped alleviate this a bit, but it just shouldn't have been this way to begin with. But that aside, my main point is, the other games almost made me feel bad for abusing the tools they gave me. But Terastallization has such a large presence in Paldea that it feels much more natural to just whip it out whenever you see fit. Of course, there are restrictions, and that leads me into my next point, balance. Again, Terastallization doesn't feel nearly as broken as past gimmicks, at least during a main story playthrough, because you fight so many opponents who use it themselves. Compare this to Mega Evolution, where in X, Y, and ORAS you get like 2 to 3 battles each against opponents who Mega Evolve, in the main story, not counting post-game. Sorry youngster Joey, I just have a Mega Blaziken with an attack stat of 160, and there's nothing to deter me from using it other than my feeble consciousness, so I'll make sure your remains make it back to your family. Dynamax was the first gimmick to experiment with a true limitation, since it can't just be used out in the open, but that's not really giving the player a choice, it's just not even an option most of the time. With Terastallization, the limit is once per trip to the Pokemon Center, or so the game tells you, as I later found out you can just recharge it by touching any of the Tera Raid crystals out in the open, which I gotta say, is a nice little detail. And honestly, this is the perfect balance. Megas and Z-Moves were far too abusable in every single fight, and Dynamax was, well, you either had it or you didn't. With Terastallization, you consciously have to choose, is it worth burning my Tera in this battle? I mean, you could go back and recharge at any time, but let's face it, I'm lazy. But as I mentioned earlier, the balance point has another side, the competitive aspect. And really, you can even split that between singles and VGC. I'm not nearly as involved in competitive Pokemon as I used to be, but I will say in the small amounts of both formats that I've played so far this gen, I've actually really enjoyed using Tera Types. It's not really as much of a total crapshoot as you might initially think, because really every Pokemon only has a handful of viable Tera Types, so it's not like every Pokemon could just spontaneously turn into 1 out of 18 types at any given time. Realistically, it's like 2, maybe 3 types that you have to consider while selecting your move. It's not that hard to keep up with. And you can predict what your opponent Tera's into and use it against them. I think Z-Moves is the best comparison here because that was also a one-turn-only gotcha moment, and at times that just didn't feel fun because your opponent could just randomly fire off a nuke. There was no counterplay to it, you never had any idea which Pokemon might do it, it could just happen. And while Terastallization is kinda like that, you do have the ability to predict it and fight back. The only truly annoying aspect of this that I've run into is when you and your opponent are down to one last Pokemon and say they have a Tera Steel Garchomp and you have a Mamoswine. In this situation, you can either Earthquake, predicting them to go Tera Steel, or you can Ice Beam, predicting them to not Terastallize. And this 50-50 decision will determine who wins the game. That just kind of feels like a very pointless coin flip added into the mix. I don't quite like it when that situation pops up, but in the grand scheme of things, that's a fairly rare situation. On the other hand, I think Terastallization is pretty awesome in VGC. There's an open team sheet format right now, which definitely helps. You should always know what Tera types your opponent is carrying, and that helps eliminate a lot of the surprise factor. I just started playing VGC for the first time this generation, and it doesn't really feel cheap in any way. Once you've been in a certain situation enough times, you can sort of pinpoint those moments in a match where someone is most likely going to use their Tera. Sure, there are a few offenders who feel grossly overpowered with Tera, like do I think Fluttermane should be able to go Tera Fairy and KO both opponents with Dazzling Gleam? No, that's a bit silly. But in doubles, Tera appears to mostly be a defensive tactic, so it's not really a huge issue. Again, take what I say here with a tiny grain of salt just because I'm not the most experienced VGC player. Who knows, Wolfglick could make a video tomorrow about why Terastallization sucks and then I get ratioed by the entire VGC community, but I'll just say I think regardless of the format, it's a remarkably well-balanced mechanic. Also, it's that point in the video where I ask you to subscribe. I don't really have a reason this time, I just really want you to. I'll give you a cookie. So moving on to our third point, story and lore, it's hard to say a lot at the current moment because chances are we're not going to learn the whole story about Terastallization until the Indigo Disc DLC drops later this year. But from what we can infer, Terastallization was created by a legendary Pokemon, in this case Terapagos, in a very similar fashion to the previous 2 gimmicks, maybe 3, Megas were a little weirder. I do think this particular idea is getting a little tired, I'm not sure how else they'd introduce it. But whatever, it's been done before. In a way, I do like how we didn't get the full story in the base game. I think that's something that Scarlet and Violet as a whole has done very well. It's not quick to answer every mystery. I think a lot of the newer games sometimes answer too much. They don't leave enough room for mysteries or interpretation. So while I can assume it's just another gimmick made by a legendary, maybe that's not all. Maybe there's some hidden connection between it and Paradox Pokemon, or how Terastallization left Area 0 to begin with. So it's hard to really rate this one all too much, but I'm kinda glad that we've reached a stage where these gimmicks don't have to be over-explained to us in every generation. We can just accept them for what they are. Next up, we have Hype Factor, and I'll be honest, this is probably the only point where Terastallization outright loses to all the other gimmicks, except maybe Z-Moves. Like, there's no new Crystal Tera Charizard form for people to get hyped about, it's just, oh, it's Tera Dragon Charizard. Like, it's unique, but it's not really setting the world on fire, let's be honest here. I kinda wish there had maybe been new evolutions linked to Terastallizing, like maybe Onix evolves into a real Crystal Onix after it's been Terastallized a certain number of times. Or as Brassius teased, maybe Sudowoodo could have a real Grass-type evolution if you change your Sudowoodo's Tera type to Grass. Of course, they would probably have to address the issue about the Tera Shard grinding that I mentioned earlier, but still, I feel like they could have been just a bit more creative in this department. About the only excitement that you can derive from Terastallization is just finding a new Pokemon with a unique Tera type, which I would say is more cool than hype. There's not a lot to anticipate, you know every Pokemon can have one of 18 types as a Tera type, and there's nothing much beyond that. When they reveal a Tera Raid event, everyone's just kinda like, oh yeah, that's neat, but when they revealed Mega Metagross 9 years ago, people were losing their minds. This is probably the least important factor, at least to me personally, since hype only lasts for so long, but it is worth considering. And I guess that brings me to my last point, the extra features that Terastallization has brought us, mostly just the Tera raids. I already compared these to the max raids from Sword and Shield in a previous video, and as I said, I think these are way better. Disregarding all the mechanic changes to raid battles, just the fact that your reward as a Pokemon with a unique type is way cooler than just having a slightly higher Dynamax level. Again, if the Pokemon we were raiding didn't have a Gmax form, then there was little reason to do it. Here you have like 400 Pokemon with 18 possible Tera types. That's like 7,000 unique types of raids. Of course, not every Pokemon appears in raids, but still, raids feel considerably more important here thanks to Terastallization just being an inherently more interesting mechanic. I can't really think of another gimmick that would give raids this level of replayability. Like, sometimes it's just fun to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go catch that Tera Fire Eevee. Am I gonna use it? I don't know, but it'll be cool to have. So to break down the final scores for each category, I'm gonna give accessibility an 8 out of 10, they just gotta fix the Tera Shard hunting. I'll give balance a solid 9 out of 10, I was pleasantly surprised at how well it was pulled off, and it actually makes the meta fun. Story is like a 5 out of 10, mostly because it's just unfinished, it's hard to call that category good or bad. Hype factor is like a 3, just because of outside the Tera raid announcements, there's nothing really crazy to look forward to. And extra features, I will also give a 9. I'll only take a point off just because raids were technically Gen 8's thing, so it wasn't an original idea, just an idea they made better. Overall, I would say this is probably Pokemon's best gimmick so far, at least for me personally. I know Mega Evolution still has its devout followers, but this is probably the first one that I think genuinely just improves the game across the board. Sure, there are aspects that I think other gimmicks handled better, like Megas were more hype and Dynamax had better lore, but I don't think Tera flopping in those categories actually hurts the game in any tangible way. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. Do you love Terastallization? Hate it? Lukewarm? Let me know down below. But don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this one, and as usual, shout out to my lovely channel members. I'll see you guys next time.